Hey, church, it's Clark here with our Wednesday word for this week. We are going to continue reading through First Peter chapter 4. We're going to read verses 12 through 19. So pause for a second and read First Peter chapter 4, verses 12 through 19. So pause and read that. All right. So, as I was trying to think of a way to kind of start this and think about, okay, what's a story that I could tell about suffering? Because that's what this passage is about, is suffering well. Really, what all First Peter is about. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, I don't have a good story. Why is that? It's because Clark, you know nothing about suffering. You haven't really gone through much suffering in your life. You can't really tell it. So before we start, that's my big caveat to start things off. This is coming from someone who doesn't know much about suffering. So try to listen to Peter more than me. But I do know the only suffering I've really had is like physical, like pain or sickness is all I could really think of in terms of, and there's two things that really, when I'm either sick or if I, pulled a muscle in my back or something and I'm hurting, there's two things. Is one, I'm really focused on myself and my pain and what I'm going through, and I don't think about other people much. And then the second thing is I'm really grumpy. And I think that can be I think we all can relate to that, is that when we are not feeling well, when we are suffering, when we're not being treated well, we tend to focus more on ourselves and we tend to not treat other people well. And that is what Peter is saying we got to go away from. First, we need to focus on Christ, all right, who suffered for us, who continued to do good even though he was being mistreated, right? We remember Christ. And then, and I think this is the key to the entire book, First Peter, is that in the midst of suffering, in the midst of your pain, in the midst of your confusion, whatever it is you're going through, in the midst of that, continue to do good. Don't use it as an excuse to do bad, but in the midst of suffering, continue to do good, just like Christ did, right? Throughout First Peter, this theme of do good, continue to do good, is all the way through. You can see it in chapter 2, all the way through the verses we're reading here. I think I counted like 7 or 8 times where Peter, in some way, says to do good, to do what is right. Continue to do this so that everyone can see your good works and glorify God, right? Because continue to do good even though you're suffering. And remember, this isn't some guy who's away, who's living in a palace saying, hey, I know you're having a hard time, but keep doing good. Peter is a suffering person, right? Suffering for Jesus, writing to another group of people who are suffering for Jesus. And he is with them in that suffering, saying, continue to do good even though we are suffering together. So I think that there's essentially two groups of people, right? There's people who are currently suffering. And remember, these people are suffering because of their Christianity, because of the fact that they are trying to follow Jesus. They're being ridiculed, reviled, rebuked, made fun of, mocked. And I think the call to, if you're in that situation where people are saying, what are you doing? Why are you living like this? Why are you acting this way? Like, why would you follow Jesus? Um, is to remember that story and don't use it as an excuse to fight back or to say mean words back, but remember our story, remember who Jesus is, and remember that the suffering of Jesus, that wasn't the end of his story, and it's not going to be the end of your story either. Suffering and pain will not be the end of your story. It's going to be like Christ, where resurrection is the end of your story. The glory is the end of your story, right? So trying to see that light at the end of the tunnel, which can be really hard in the midst of suffering, which is why we need the second group of people who maybe aren't suffering. We need people like myself who have a privileged, cushy life, um, to enter into that pain and enter into that suffering with other people who are suffering, because that is also Christ-like, is to say, okay, I'm not going to just sit back and be comfortable. I see people hurting, I see people suffering, so I'm going to go to them and I'm going to accept some pain and suffering so that I can be a comfort um, to other people in the same way that Christ entered into our lives, and same way he entered into our lives, and to take away the pain, to take away our sin. and to lead us towards the light. So that's I think the message of First Peter is do good while you're suffering. And I think the message of Scripture is for all of us who aren't, to enter into that pain, enter into that suffering, to help others who are. So that's the word for this week from First Peter chapter 4. Hope that you're having a good week. And I just realized that there's a ball sitting at the top of that bush over there. That's awesome. I'm gonna go get that down. Have a good week.